Hey, Julia Barzyk here from Wise Investigator. Today we're going to be covering the 7 months out from the NSF career proposal deadline. I'm going to very quickly go over what we talked about on the last two videos. That was 11 months before the deadline, 9 months before the deadline. The first video provided an overview of the announcement, so please check out that video if you haven't. It's critically important that you understand where all this is coming from and what are the official rules, the official guidance related to the career program. The last video I did was on your institutional support. For anything like this that's a big effort and where support can be available, you want to make sure you make the most of it. So please watch that video so you can understand how you can get as much help as possible, because you deserve it. You deserve the help. All right, so let's get into what we're talking about at 7 months out from the deadline. So we're going to start thinking about what you actually want to do in terms of the research and what your plans would be. We're going to do this because we want to assess your strengths and weaknesses at this point. Putting together a career proposal is a lot of work, and you do have 3 chances, as the rules stand now, to get a proposal funded. But if you're not ready to submit, there are better uses of your time, including beefing up some of the things we're going to talk about today and putting your effort into doing the things and getting the pieces together that will put you in a better position next year or the year after to submit a strong career proposal. So before we get into writing something like this, we want to make sure that we've done an assessment and figured out if it's a good idea to even go ahead with it. So we're going to talk about this in terms of the 3 important categories of contribution that you need to be making with a funded career proposal: intellectual merit, broader impacts, and the integration of research and education. So the first 2 are common to virtually all NSF programs. Intellectual merit, broader impacts, you've certainly heard of those and know something about them. But the integration of research and education is unique to career. So don't worry about making notes through the video. I am going to provide you with a document that you take home and you can use to put together the pieces so that you'll be able to make the assessment. So what we're going to talk about today is gathering the pieces together so you can think about them, and then you will want to make the assessment based on the information that you put together. So in this video itself, we are not actually going to make an assessment. We're going to put together the pieces, I'll help you understand how to put together the pieces so that in the weeks and months ahead, you'll start to make this assessment. All right, so intellectual merit, you've certainly heard of this before. It's the potential to advance knowledge. And for this one, what I want to talk about are 2 of the 5 merit review criteria. So all of these merit review criteria are very important. And by pulling these 2 out here that I have in red and that I'll go over, I am in no way saying that they're more important than the others. What I am saying is these are the ones that we want to think about right now, where we are on the timeline. So I'll cover all 5 quickly so we understand where we are, but then I'm going to go back and talk about these first 2. First, suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts. Next, that your plan is well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on sound rationale. That there is a mechanism to assess success of your proposed research plan. That the qualifications of the individual, team, and institution are adequate to perform the research as planned. And also that there are adequate resources available in terms of your budget, the other personnel, resources that you may be using, and the facilities, etc. So the bottom 3, again, they're important as well, but we want to focus on the first 2. Because with the third one, let me put that aside for a second, because I kind of thought about, including that one here today, but I think it's better to hold off on it for now. And for the bottom 2, the qualifications of the individual, team, institution, and the resources, in most cases, you are qualified and you do have a qualified team. and you do have resources, at least if you make enough, allocate enough budget for them, which you'll do as part of the proposal. But it's often the case that the PI needs to work more on learning how to demonstrate the qualifications, demonstrate that the resources are there, and communicate that in a way that's convincing in the proposal. So I have less concern that you actually have a significant weakness in your qualifications, or you have a significant weakness in the facilities that you have available. But what we will talk about later is making sure that you are able to communicate the strengths of your qualifications, the strengths of your team, and the strengths of your facilities and your other resources. So the first two here: suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts. So it's time to start thinking about what research you actually want to do. And it's difficult to provide this kind of one-way guidance that I'm giving you here through these videos without knowing what discipline you're coming from, or even hearing anything from you at all in terms of what you're thinking about for your idea. So I'm going to have to give very general guidance right now, but I think that the most helpful thing for you to think about right now is the planned scope of your research. So you would be funded for 5 years on this award. Therefore, you want to talk about a plan that's bigger than a 2 or 3 year project, but it can't be so large in scope that you're talking about something that should really be like its own NSF program. So this is difficult because you're shooting bigger and you want to indicate that you're a leader who is impacting your field broadly, but it also, what you propose also has to be something that's manageable to accomplish in 5 years. The best way that you're going to get feedback on this is by asking somebody in your discipline who's familiar with the typical scopes for these types of awards based on the type of work that you do for their opinion. But in order for you to get an opinion, an informed opinion, you're going to have to take a first stab. You're going to have to put pen to paper, put some ideas down so you can use that as a starting point to de-scope, to make it what you want to do smaller, maybe more reasonable. Or if you are thinking too small, to expand and think about what further implications, how could you do something a little bigger, a little broader. And so right now, with this first criteria, this first bullet point here, we'll think about the scope of what you want to do and putting that into words. Even if it's not full sentences, just some bullets or some ideas, getting some idea for that down. The next one is about your actual research plan. The best thing that you can do here at this stage is to think in terms of a Gantt chart. So what would be the big tasks that would need to happen for you to do this work, and what order would they be happening in? Would any of them be happening concurrently, at the same time? And why? That's the rationale. So are you going to do numerical simulations and physical experiments? Or are you going to do field work and you need to go out and collect some data and then you're going to do an analysis? Or are you going to do some kind of analysis and then you're going to go out and collect data in the field? Going back to the physical experiments and the numerical simulations, is one of those activities going to happen first, or are they going to be happening at the same time? Are you going to be developing a model that's based off of data that you collect from the field or something from the simulation? So, of course, your research could involve any or all of these activities, and likely it involves a few different kind of approaches, especially for a 5-year project. So what you want to do here is think about at a high level, what those activities would be and when they would be happening in that 5-year period, especially when they would be happening relative to each other, and put that on a Gantt chart. Now, very importantly, you are not committing to this plan. You will have many, many opportunities to revise this, but it's just a first stab at what a research plan could look like. So these are the two activities that you should do at this point, and I'll give you the document where you'll be able to make notes and actually describe the scope of your research, and also put in a baby Gantt chart, perhaps, or even just spell out in words what your research plan would be. This is broader impacts. So as you know, broader impacts are the impacts of your work that could benefit society. It could contribute to the achievement of specific and desired societal outcomes. So let's go through what these could be. One people think of pretty quickly is education. Of course, you're an educator, and you are going to also consider education in the third category, right, when we get to the next slide and the next part of what the career program is all about. But what I want you to think about here are other types of educational impacts besides what could be happening in the classroom or with your own students or trainees. And so this would be something like, just for one example, because there's many, really an infinite number of examples that could fit for any of these different types of broader impacts. But think about not just using integrating your research and education like we're going to talk about in the next slide, but what if some activity that you did with some students at a local high school ended up being extended and developed by staff at that school into a curriculum, perhaps, so that impact that you had was not just right in real time when you were there in interacting yourself with the students, but that somebody else took something of value from what you contributed, what you created, and has built that into something even more, something longer lasting, something that's now happening and having a benefit now that you're not even there. So that, again, is just one example of those, say, broader impacts to education. Public engagement is anything from community activities, engaging people that through media, popular media or media appearances, industry partnerships. That's pretty self-explanatory, but think about what if you don't have any industrial collaborators. Maybe there are people out there in the private sector who are interested in what you're doing. You could start to build some connections with those types of people. National security, of course, is a broader impact, as well as economic benefits. You can think about things like manufacturing or natural resources. And the two important points that I want to make here is that the broader impacts are not only add-on type activities. So sometimes people think, well, to have my broader impacts, I'm going to go do this outreach type activity. And that could be a very worthwhile activity to do. So I would not discourage anyone from doing something like that. But I would encourage you to think about the impacts that your research is having just by nature of doing the research and creating the new knowledge. So it does not have to be an add-on or a complementary activity. Many broader impacts happen just by nature of doing the work. And doing the work and disseminating the new knowledge too, because people have to learn about the work that you did. Also, broader impacts, that is not the same as broadening participation. So if you are involved, for example, in public engagement, this could be a broader impact activity that also serves to broaden participation because you're reaching people in the community, say, who are from groups that are underrepresented in STEM. So by doing this community engagement, you may be broadening participation. But just be aware that these two terms do mean something different. So be careful not to use them, or maybe even not to think of them. It's more important that you don't think of them interchangeably, just so you can not get confused. Now, this topic here is unique to career, integration of research and education. So this part of your career effort is required. You absolutely will have to demonstrate that you have a plan and that you're going to integrate research and education in your research project. So there is no single approach that would fit well here. It's what's going to work. It's going to be fairly specific, or no, not specific, but it's going to be impacted by the type of work you do, which of course depends on what discipline you're in, what types of approaches you take to getting the work done. And when you get to the point when you're having discussions with program directors, this is the kind of thing that you can run by them. We don't need to worry too much about, if you have a really great idea here that you need to tweak a little bit, maybe based on some comments from the program director, that's something that we'll think about later. What you want to think about here is just like for the other two slides where I said, just some first ideas. So just some first ideas about how you would be integrating your research with education. Now, it's fairly straightforward for most PIs to think about research impacting their educational goals. So there's many examples, I'm sure, of how you've done this with the work that you do in the classroom and with using what you know about your research and letting your students learn about your research and even conduct some kinds of research themselves so they can further their education. But we really need to have a feedback here and that brings in this next bullet, which is how the education activities should feed back into the research. So this part is a little bit trickier for many PIs because you want to be thinking about if you, for example, have your students collect some data. Maybe they have some sensors that they install in their homes, or they go into the field and make some measurements or collect some samples. And not only do you want to have them using those data, again, for their own benefit to learn, but you may want to use those data in your research. So of course, so to make sure that you have good data, that you have usable data, that you have the right data from the students, when you're not collecting it yourself, you're going to want to think ahead about how you could construct these assignments and these activities in a way that you would get the data that you need that would actually augment and improve what you're doing. Your own research would benefit from the involvement of students or others who are involved in educational activities. And I am highlighting here the timestamp around 17 minutes on the May 2023 NSF Career Program webinar. You may want to check that out. I just kind of provided a little bit of a summary of what they talk about on that webinar on this topic because this is specific to NSF Career. But I encourage you to just watch the whole webinar. Okay. So, exercise for your 7 months out to the deadline. I have provided in the comments below a link to a Google document where I have provided the information from each one of these slides, which are your core areas where you need to be thinking about your plans for the career proposal, especially in terms of any areas that may be weak and which areas could be particularly strong. So in order to make this strengths and weaknesses assessment, you really want to give yourself some time to think about this and do this. Well, first do this brain dump that I'm suggesting you do on a document here, and then let that sit. Let more ideas come to mind. Fill that out. Do more dumping of information into this document or a document you can make on your own, and then you're gonna see where my strengths are, where my weaknesses are, and we will talk about how you may want to go take those next steps in terms of deciding whether or not you're going to move forward. I'm not going to be able to give specific advice through these YouTube videos, of course, because I'm not receiving any information from you, but I am going to help you put the pen to paper. Like, this is the first step of that process so that you will have something physically. Or even if you end up in a conversation with someone and you don't have, a physical document with you, you will have thought this through enough that you will be able to communicate to your mentors, to your colleagues, to eventually when you're in touch with the program director, what your plans are for each of these 3 areas. And then they will be able to help you make that assessment, because you're going to want to ask for advice and input on where you may be in terms of how far along you are in your progress to be ready to submit for career, but they need something to work with. And so I'm helping you get that information together so that, of course, you, most importantly, the first step is for you to think about where you are strong and where you're weak. Some of the weak areas could be fairly straightforward to beef up and flesh out. Other areas you may feel that you need more time. So that's where all of this is going. It's towards the strengths and weaknesses assessment, which we want to be doing around this time frame, into the next couple months. But in order to do that, we need to get the information. So you could be able to fill this out here with intellectual merit, where you want to just write a few sentences, write a few bullet points about what you think the intellectual merit is of the research you want to do. Think a lot about scope here. This is going to be a very important thing to get right fairly early on in the process. And again, you will be able to get good feedback on this from your colleagues, but you have to have something to present to them before they can give you good feedback. And think about the project plan. So what are the tasks that are going to need to happen? And importantly, when are they happening relative to each other, and why? Why are you collecting the data first and then doing the analysis? Or why are you doing the analysis and then you're going to use that to figure out what data to collect? Or are you doing these things at the same time? There should be reasons for all of this. And not only should there be reasons, but you should be able to communicate those reasons, because if the reasons are all clear in your mind, but that's not communicated, then you can suffer consequences from that. So for broader impacts, here under each one of these categories, just start, again, the brain dump, just dumping stuff down. So any kinds of industry connections that you have, any kinds of economic benefits that could come from your work, even if it seems kind of far-fetched, just put it down. You're not committing to any of these things. And if things seem really light here, then talk to colleagues about, what they think some of your broader impacts could be in some of these areas that maybe you haven't even thought about. Start putting together those, making those connections, connecting those dots, and thinking about if there is somebody at a national lab or in industry that you want to reach out to now, and start having the discussion so you could understand, okay, maybe I'm not going to be directly collaborating with this person, but if I learn a little bit about their needs and what they work in, I could start to have a pretty informed conversation about how my work could help that area. This could be something that it could be something you want to expand on and build up that your knowledge and become more informed on potential broader impacts in the months ahead. And then finally, for the integration of research and education, you want to put a few bullets here on how your research would impact the educational goals. Again, I think that'll be a little bit more straightforward for you. But very importantly, how those education activities are going to feed back into your research. Now is the time to start jotting some ideas down for that. So go ahead and fill this out. It shouldn't really be a one-time thing. You should be able to put your first ideas in there and then kind of keep that handy so that you can add to it as you get more ideas, as you refine things further. And then when I meet with you next time in 2 months, we will talk about drafting some of these ideas out into a summary document that you will then be able to show people, your colleagues, your mentors, who are going to be well informed on things like appropriate scope or things like plans, again, for this integrated research, be able to give you very good, helpful, and informed feedback so you can make a decision in the months ahead if you want to move forward and apply for career this year, or if you don't, or if you do, but you want to use the time that you have to strengthen some of these areas to put you in the best position possible.